I do think in that youthful moment of there is a lot of things ongoing and there is a confusion about how anybody does the thing because the music industry doesn't give a good cartography. It doesn't have maps.
Yeah,
and it's a shame because I think that whole passion thing is a North Star. It is a direction, at least, to move towards. But I think we get sometimes lost in the fact of the professionalism of it or the kind of way by which it is esteemed by others rather than it being so clear that, this is our purpose.
Hey everybody, welcome to For the Record, a casual, mostly unedited conversation series presented by Grey Matter, where we talk to music heads about their stories and the music that makes them. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice. Today on episode 35, I spoke with Alfred Darlington. Under the alias Daedelus, Alfred has been an instigator of electronic music culture for more than 20 years. A fore-figure of Los Angeles' beat scene, they have released over 20 LPs, countless EPs, remixes, and additional productions on labels like Ninja Tune, Warp, and Brainfeeder. As a performer, they're synonymous with controllers from the Monome to computer-free modular and have played over 1,000 shows on 6 continents at venues ranging from the underground low-end theory to festival main stages like Coachella. Alfred's also a founding DJ at Dublab, a founding faculty member for the Berklee College of Music's EDI, that's Electronic Digital Instrument program, and a S.E.T.I artist in residence. We dove into all this as well as identity and systems of care and, of course, great music. Hope you enjoy. All right, Alfred, it is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Keegan, it's my pleasure. This may or may not be known, maybe it'll be unrolled in your intro, but we were introduced by a dear friend of mine, Mark Rodito, who has gone through a few aliases and a few life changes, and I've been game for all of it. And just to see the continuing story of any given musician, much less one that's so close in my circle, grateful for, and I know you have some involvement in. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm really grateful that we were connected through Mark. He was an early guest on the show, and we met not too long ago, year and change, I think, at a music conference put on by Water and Music, who actually coincidentally, happened to be wearing some merch from. And yeah, just kind of, he and I got wrapped up in conversation and went down a rabbit hole of our own into, I don't know, music, AI, the internet, all of the things. And stayed connected, and I've had a few really interesting conversations since then, and really value him in the way he thinks, and I appreciate that he put us in touch. And yeah, as with all of these conversations, like to start at the beginning and just kind of get a sense of you and your background, and kind of hear about where you grew up and when your relationship with music started.
Sure. I grew up in an area of Southern California called Dogtown. That's the informal name, of course,
Cool.
better known as Santa Monica. It's kind of the birthplace of modern skateboarding, inexplicably, and a lot of surf culture. It wasn't, especially growing up there, it wasn't such a magnet for the glossy imagery that maybe is now associated with it. If you've played Grand Theft Auto, whatever, Los Andreas, or things that have brought you to Santa Monica in virtual fashions, it can be kind of seen in a kind of a more uppercase value. When I was growing up there, it didn't feel like that. Decidedly felt like a sleepier place, a kind of suburb of Southern California's Los Angeles and elsewhere. And I adored it as a youth, but I wouldn't say that it gave me any insight into the things that were to be in my life. Like both parents aren't especially musically enabled. They both had record collections, and I was lucky to have that early on. But yeah, I don't know if it would have made any sense had I not chosen a musical path. They were into some of the out there kind of things. They had Joe Ely records and Sun Ra records and Non Such and Folkways, and
Cool.
they were a product of their time, but they didn't actively put those records on. They just had them in the collection. They were a little bit museum pieces, maybe in that way. And so my interest also kind of grew up around that, and that sleepy thing made it so that I had a lot of listening time, a lot of languid moments, trying to flip records and figure things out. I'm a bit on the older side, so I am the beneficiary of a non-scarcity society. Not everything was given, so I kind of had to dig a little bit, and there was some record stores to do such, and I'm very much a product of that culture as well, the digging, finding samples, finding sounds. Yeah. Only having what you're able to scrap together for a period, and thankfully, we're well beyond that now, but I do feel like it was very much informed my aesthetic, that I brought forward later. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Could you talk a little bit about, you know, continuing, along the rabbit hole kind of theme, some of the
Mhm.
rabbit holes that these places, crate digging, brought you down? Like, what were the things that were interesting, to you? What did you see, and what was, what helped to build that foundation for you musically?
Yeah, I mean, as an anecdote, Los Angeles in the late '80s, early '90s, when I was really getting my own ears, had an inordinate amount of electronic music going on. I had already been kind of tuned in and listening. For whatever reason, my next door neighbor's father's brother, if I have that straight,
Hmm.
was a manager slash something else to Parliament Funkadelic.
Cool.
So as a very young person, I had all the Parliament records. I was able to meet George Clinton when I was like 4 years old.
Sweet.
I remember distinctly his like purple tri mohawk, and like what a personage. He carried the warehouse that we visited. Again, it's one of these weird sense memories where it's like, I'm not 100% sure this is true, but it smelled of like photochemicals. I
Hmm.
couldn't tell you why, but it was like that weird, yeah, very specific smells of a space. And so that was like early on, but then just a little bit later in those kind of later '80s and early '90s, there was all this electronic music afoot, and like freestyle music, and the kind of the sounds of like Dream Team, which is like an early Dr. Dre project, or maybe the first Dr. Dre project or whatever. The World Class Wrecking Crew, all these things. So that was the sounds of what was going. And when I was dipping into record bins, I was like kind of looking for similar. There was these really important record stores for me, but of course would be impossible if you weren't from the place. Places like Rhino Records or Penny Lane. Um, they were small chains that happened to have either the kinds of 12 inches and full lengths that were already informed by the aesthetics that were going on at the time, but also really importantly for me, they would have imports.
Hmm.
And so when I really got my own lunch money together to go skip a meal and grab a record, and that was something, again, like I don't know 100% why I decided to do those things. I didn't have turntables at the time. I wasn't a DJ. I just was, if you at all wanted to listen to a thing, you had to go out and buy it. There wasn't listening stations. It was, I just don't even understand how we functioned in hindsight, but you would see a cover you liked, or you would recognize a name on the personnel that was listed on the back, or you would see a font and you would be like, I saw that font somewhere else on a different record. Maybe this record has the same sounds. Like, how did we jump to those conclusions? And yet
Yeah.
it made sense. And I got into records that way. I got into UK rave, especially. That was the sound that called out to me. Artists like Asen and Two Bad Mice, Sons of a Loop de Loop era, everything spelled weird ways, all the records named the funniest things, but a lot of production house records and XL records, and these labels that again would maybe have very limited pressings, but because bestowed by these beautiful record stores that had their outposts in our little sleepy town, I was able to get a little deep on it. And then there was a record station, a radio station called Mars FM, which played these songs. And um, there was more zigs and zags that got me there, but I'm just so in awe that like I saw a cover of this one record by this group Asen that was like my fundamental, my record, my like thing that got me on this path.
Hmm.
It was just a really pretty picture of the moon. It was just kind of beautiful.
Hmm.
And it was this record, Trip to the Moon Part One, that sampled John Barry, which is a composer that did a lot of the James Bond soundtracks,
Hmm.
right? And like against the sounds of like amens and break beats, the think break or whatever, and it would have these little like high pitched vocals copped from Prince's what is it? Not pastel. Oh gosh, I'm gonna blank on it. one of his like labels that he had. Anyways, it was all these illegal samples all churned together and like wouldn't have ever flown on an official thing, but because it was like 500 presses or less or whatever, it kind of made its way to me. And it just blew my mind that you could put these things together. I thought it was illegal. I thought you couldn't take classic records and put it against break beats. And like, there was no rules, of course, but I just, you see the world in like kind of maybe brighter, but more striated spaces. And so, yeah, it took me out of my shell. It shucked me like a clam or whatever. And yeah, it put me on a path of like trying to chase after those sounds for years, both rave records, but also like those weird mix-ups. And I think if anything, my sound can be best described as that. At least my early records were totally just trying to be those rave records, just slightly different BPMs and some different classic records, but all that kind of same idea.
Cool. Yeah, it's pretty crazy thinking about kind of the impact of aesthetics or something, something that, is as simple as like a beautiful image, of a moon, can draw you in. And like in retrospect, like, oh shit, that was that was the thing. Like that, that set the tone.
Yeah. I don't want to put too much of that like Wayback Machine on, or like, kind of have long lenses towards the past, but I do think it was interesting that people really wore the fashion that they were listening to. You could kind of guess pretty closely what somebody was into based on their shoelaces or their jacket or directly wearing a pin of a band and things. Now, if you saw somebody with a NoFX shirt or Nirvana or Public Enemy, it's not so likely to necessarily listen to the thing. It's become, the aesthetics may be stronger than the sound.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing necessarily. I think there is something to be said about a great logo or a really, really loud, so to speak, visual that can say something. And maybe we're a little bit more in a visual moment, but yeah. So when I was listening to these rave records, that was one thing about it, is that you would see on the cover these like imagery of these dark clubs. And as like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, it's places of mythology, right? Like this is my pantheon of Greek gods, is somebody wearing oversized Jenko pants and glow sticks, maybe Mickey Mouse gloves, and it was really big for me. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So once you had the foundation, like what, I guess what were the first, what were the steps into your own music making, into thinking like, all right, this is something that I can do, or at least, I want to try to do and be part of.
See, this is where I kind of let myself down, maybe, is I had myself inflated by those sounds and I loved those sounds and I would collect those records, but I had no path towards production. I had already been invested in music and I was really the beneficiary of Santa Monica's great public education, like especially their orchestra and band. So I already was playing bass clarinet and double bass, not things I heard on these records particularly.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined jazz groups and I played in the marching band and I, fumbled around and made music my all the time, everything. But when it came down to like, well, how do I fit into this? I just reached for the nearest thing, which is basically go to jazz school and learn how to play all those kind of the Great American Songbook and play on a cruise ship or maybe a jazz brunch. And that was like the goal of that program in some ways, to get you ready for a professional life of a background musician.
Right.
And I kind of described myself well enough that I did that for about 3 years in my upper education. When I got to college, spent 3 years floundering around, not really believing in the music, but just kind of knowing that was the path to keep me involved in the loudness. And I would listen in all my free time to the DJs, and I would go out and try to be a DJ. I was like collecting jungle records by that point. That was several years later, and the scene had evolved. The BPMs had gotten faster. And so people like Ray Keith or Dillinger, Dom and Roland, gosh, there were so many names at that time that were like kind of top of the pops at that moment. And I loved their music, and I was still collecting in that vein of, where people went from the rave days on. But yeah, no outcomes, no idea. And I was also maybe buying synthesizers at that point, maybe a little bit too, but again, fumbling around, not really terribly applying myself. And so I kind of let myself down. I didn't have the imagination towards what a professional musical life was. And not to blame my parents, they were very supportive, but there was no ideation coming from elsewhere. And certainly the records, again, could paint a vivid picture, but not how you actually make a profession out of it.
Right.
So I spent 3 years in that jazz boot camp, and then I thankfully I had this amazing teacher named John Clayton, who's like a big band legend and like quite a bass player. And he had the best advice. He told me to quit. He's like, your heart's not in this thing. What are you doing?
Yeah.
You should stop playing. And he was absolutely right. And it was the best gift. As an educator now, I would be so taken to task if I told that to one of my students. They would, the administration would not like that whatsoever. But I think because John is such a legend and he knows, he was right as rain, and it pushed me into places that were uncomfortable and forcing myself to actually learn synthesis, learn a DAW, which was, I got Ableton 1. I didn't like it, so I went back to Pro Tools or whatever else was easier to access at the time. And I made that my life for several years, even before my first record kind of really arrived.
Hmm.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah. I'm curious if, it's interesting hearing you talk about it in this way of like feeling like you let yourself down, kind of deviated from your heart, so to speak. Yeah, I'm curious if you felt that, in the moment, or that's something that you realized like after John Clayton gave you this advice and you went off and it's like, oh yeah, this feels right.
Well, that's the thing. I think the passion was really bright and clear, but again, the pathway to it was devious. I would go out and see DJs. I remember when I very first went to raves, like this would be earlier on than all this. I thought the DJ was making all the music.
Mm,
That was I only had bands in my background. I only had these like orchestras, and of course, you could have written notes on a page, but it was made alive by the player. And so seeing a DJ, especially when they're up in their kind of DJ booth, they're kind of hidden away, it was like I didn't know what it took to make those sounds. And so I just assumed that everything was pouring forth and being microphoned or some weird fantasy. And so even though I was buying the records and hearing the sounds, I didn't put two and two together, or it added up to five or something. I don't know.
mm,
But that all being said, you've probably interviewed plenty of people, and I imagine that their passions are pretty bright by the time you talk to them.
right.
It's pretty clear the path that they took to be to be in front of you, so to speak. But I do think in that youthful moment of there is a lot of things ongoing, and there is a confusion about how anybody does the thing because the music industry doesn't give a good cartography. It doesn't have maps,
Yeah.
and it's a shame because I think that whole passion thing is a North Star. It is a direction, at least to move towards. But I think we get sometimes lost in the fact of the professionalism of it, or the kind of way by which it is esteemed by others rather than it being so clear that, this is our purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know if you get other answers that are thus, but I know for myself, that's the thing I let myself down about. But I also, I do think in this one other regard is the people that I would eventually become my peers were inevitably younger than me when I really got involved in the music scene because I had spent some years kind of languishing and floundering and looking. And of course, that was the secret of how I was able to kind of establish myself so quickly, or so to speak. Like I had a few really good, bright breaks when I first started putting out records. It was phenomenal looking back, the kind of opportunities I was afforded. I'm so grateful. The people I was able to work with, the shows I played, some of that stuff was amazing. But of course, it's because I spent years. And then eventually when I got involved in scene, I was just a little older and not wiser by any means, but it did mean that this little disparity meant that I was always a little out of sorts.
Hmm.
And it's a nice thing that's occurred a lot in my life, to not be quite fitting in easy or fitting in period, square pegs for round holes or whatever.
Right.
Uh, it's just an advantage to look from. I don't know. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's funny to like, to when we're talking about the past, it's like, oh gosh, why this and that? And it's because you had to kind of look from a different direction, maybe sometimes. I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot of magic there, in looking from other directions and not fitting and then trying to figure out how you do it. Like those kind of liminal spaces, or where there's like, it's kind of where the art comes from, in some ways.
I think so. I do find it funny that there is so many of these recipes, not to bring it too fast forward, but like if you look at YouTube or a lot of what passes for our musical education, especially in production, so many recipes are given. this is the sound settings, this is the production tools you use, here's where you find your samples. The exploratory side of it, although I think still, of course, part of what matriculates, what part of what arrives at your sound, but the fact that you don't have to quest as hard or the tools are kind of prescribed.
Mm.
I think we're missing, some people are missing a bit of a trick, and they're getting to great sounds immediately, and the struggle of it is gone. But then some of the exploration is also eliminated, and
Yeah.
so, and I appreciate that. And we talked about machine learning briefly, or AI,
Hmm.
and again, that's another thing where it's like it's so possible that could be such an exploratory space, but a lot of people are using it less so like that, more like here's your best sound settings, here's your perfect mastering. Some of the records I love don't sound good. They
Yeah.
don't have good fidelity.
Yeah.
And it's funny, a lot of people, when you ask them about their favorite songs, they like the Beatles, and that like the actual frequency range of that is abysmal.
Mm.
Or they're like, kind of weird lo-fi house kind of things. And it's like, I know we're doing things to make it purposefully sound lo-fi, but it also escapes easy answers why we might have such a disjointed set of aesthetics that are ongoing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, totally. Like it feels like overly prescriptive in like its approach, and I don't know, like it creates this sort of norm of perfection, to a certain
Mhm.
degree, and it's like within reach. It's like, oh, I just need to watch this 12-minute video on YouTube, do exactly what they did, and it'll be perfect.
Yeah.
And in that perfection, it's like there's not that much that's actually that interesting, all the time.
Or
It's
you get to outcomes that are similarly prescribed. You get to
right,
the
right.
glass ceiling of it, and you can like immediately immediately interact with the existing, but rather than like kind of transgress and move beyond. And I love it. So many YouTube things is specifically about be the genre. Like here's your sounds, here's the settings. Like you are now color based, or you're now you're melodic house, and it's like, but yeah, that's been quite done. There's a name for that genre. That's part of the reason why. And
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. But that being all said, I mean, I so when I was before when I was early putting out records, it didn't fit in with it didn't fit in the same bins I was pulling records from. It didn't fit in the cultures that were surrounding, and I did feel really left out. And then so I can understand deeply wanting to belong, wanting to be able to participate in the dance floor, wanting to be that backing track for that rapper that you esteem. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But I think that, there's like a comfort to the other side of that when you think about like a lot of the like a lot of the artists whose identities are most clear, most resonant is like through how distinctly they followed like their specific sound.
Mhm.
I always think of like it's an incredible feat when you can listen to a song for like 3 or 4 seconds and be like, I know exactly who that is,
Mhm.
like that. And if you do, like if you know that, that means that that doesn't quite fit in anything else. It's like this is a person who is their genre, which is pretty crazy.
And it's especially crazy too when you have somebody who makes genre. They become so distinct that other people follow in their footsteps,
Mhm.
and kind of by reinforcement or by casting long shadows kind of create something. And then I love it too when they can transgress that themselves and kind of make new spaces. There is obviously a handful of artists where you can probably, even by saying those words, that you might immediately sum it up as being people who start and move from and move to and are continually a lighthouse for others to follow. And
Mhm.
that is a beautiful aspiration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I agree. I mean, that's been like a lot of quite a bit of the focus, or like maybe the through line of my music journalism over the years is like really diving into, you know, like all of the conceptualists who you might not like want to sit down and listen to their album, every day. But like just I think for that reason, those types of people often get overlooked, and it's like really important to trace the lineage of the impact that they had, just purely to give permission to other people to think about their art, more broadly, and like less defined within these certain parameters. It's like, oh, that guy can do that thing, that crazy crazy thing, and that's still music. Well, I can lean a little bit in that direction. Yeah, and I think like mainstream music, not even mainstream music, just let's say music that like has tonality and basic structure. Like I think we owe a lot. You know, like all the culture that surrounds that type of music, I think owes a lot to those types of people.
100%. Yeah, no, we wouldn't have such a kind of a narrow space by which pop music lives if we didn't have this outside energy that is kind of pushing and fraying at its edges and moving it forward. I find it funny that you have genres like hyperpop, especially Sophie. She was such a bright,
Hmm.
beautiful presence, and really pushing on a lot of different outward in a lot of different ways, not just to make a hyperpop reality that so many other pop stars and others kind of were in those ruts, but rather like she could have gone a million different ways, or she was going so many different ways, and starting and stopping and moving. Yeah, it just kicks up that kind of dust for me. That you think about those trailblazers specifically, and she's an easy one to summon, easy,
Yeah.
and didn't always play with or played with tonality in fun ways that made all those exact same, like the Charlie XCXs and others who wanted to participate in some of that sound space, kind of funny sounding when they weren't able to be weird enough to be cool with it. It's
Mm.
kind of funny. No offense to nothing. I don't, Charlie's fine too, but yeah, it's just funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's exploratory as well. It's like hard to hone in on your thing and do so while exploring, other elements that are outside of you and don't necessarily feel right. But really, the only way to know they don't feel right is to do it, see what happens.
I mean, I would hope all of music is this conversation between the inside and the outside, the underground and the overground,
Right. Right.
pop and the unconventional, or the avant-garde, or whatever terminology suits. But it is funny, especially this is bringing it back to being in the academy, bringing in education. You formalize all of this stuff and it kind of gets turgid. It kind of stops moving. It stops dancing, especially. And I love the fact that dance music specifically, and kind of the broader music culture that is kind of populists, is always kind of moving a few steps ahead of the academy. And it's like it can't be totally normative, or else it kind of gets, everybody can tell it's uncool kind of immediately.
Right.
There's something that's essential about it that defies the convention, especially when you have to teach it. It's like, it's just wonderful that I have students constantly that are feeding me things, that they're giving me their passions now, and my sales feel so full of
Mm-hmm.
these oddities, these like outsider artists that to this one student like blew their mind in the same way that Asen did mine, right? Or others have done mine. And sometimes I listen to it and I'm just like, this is just gobbledygook. This is the kind of the nothingness, it's so thrilling to see their energy towards it, because it's never nothing. Actually, they're getting some communication directly with some authentic self through sometimes things that are, yeah, so pushing. It's wonderful. It's
Mm.
fantastic.
Yeah, I guess also if you approach it like with the intention, or like at least within the context of of that, like your education, your music education, like this is something that I'm here to to appreciate, in one way or another. Um, yeah, I'd actually love to hear a bit more, if you wouldn't mind sharing, just like what the environment of the classroom is, how how it is like teaching at Berkeley, and like hearing just a little bit about like what are the uh the goals, the trials, tribulations of like of your students, like looking at the modern music industry.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. I'd love to express, because I feel so like, just a few years ago when I started on this journey, something I never thought I would do. I never thought I'd be in education. My own education experience, like I mentioned, was a little bit bumpy
Mm,
and a little fraught. So I didn't think I would go back in. But and just filling in the blanks, what really changed my career, I can say fundamentally, is that I got involved in electronic performance in a way that hadn't really been committed before, or hadn't been widely adopted. This idea that the DJ, although like so many possibilities, but technically you're either pushing the record forward or pulling it back. It's a very linear art form. We're full of nuance and full of all these ways that the music can interact with each other, different records, different sounds. But fundamentally, since we are all thinking in an aesthetic of DJing, we're kind of in that slipstream where it's either pushing the record slightly forward or pulling it slightly back, the sounds. And so when I got involved and I started doing nonlinear reprogramming, because I was able to get an early prototype of this thing called a Monome, which is a grid of buttons, kind of anonymized, kind of open source, but the software allowed specifically to kind of play sample-based music in a way that was more livid, more moving than it had been previously, and it's still weirdly, kind of inexplicably ahead of the curve, I guess. I mean, it's just so weird to think it's like 20 years old now, but like there isn't that many other people, I guess, that try to get involved in that way.
Right.
Maybe for technical reasons, I get it. It's not the most fun always, but I love it. And so that fundamental where I started getting involved in that kind of pushy place by which performance could happen made it so that when they invited me to start teaching it. Basically, they invited me to start teaching electronic performance at Berklee. Berklee, a school which is really known for its jazz and rock program. Their electronic music is there, but it's been way more producer focused up until 5 years ago when I got involved to do their what they call EDI, which is electronic digital instrument. It's a weird acronym, but it kind of gets to the point of like, well, what is a digital instrument? What's an electronic instrument? How does it perform? How does it play? How do we perceive it? Non-resonant instruments in general, kind of what rules does it have to define to actually be seen as performing? And it's been great. So I've been writing pedagogy around this. I've been really getting deep on it. But one of the things that's overwhelming about it is that not only has it not been taught so much formally previously, there's plenty of examples again on YouTube or otherwise of people pushing buttons or Fred again, doing some light amount of finger drumming over existing records and kind of defying format, this hybrid DJ idea, or Honey Dijon or others adding live effects, and we're really getting deep on the pioneers set of like prescribed effects. But again, it's all these like very recursive tight circles that people are formalized. And so when you get something that's truly out of the box, when you get somebody really using gesture, or they're kind of using these outside modular systems, and you have to have some framework to start to put it in the school, which is kind of reductive.
Right.
But then equally, you also want the sounds to meet the expectation space of the music itself. This is a whole mix that I've just been so awash in, and I love. And the students themselves, I think they usually come in with a pretty narrow idea because they've seen somebody up on a stage once doing the thing. Sometimes me, but most often they get it from these boiler rooms or otherwise. And they have beautiful, if flawed, ideas of what the artist does, right? Especially when it comes to EDM and the big room thing, the big rave. They see the DJ on stage, and most often the DJ is doing very little DJing. They're mostly conducting, right? This grand kind of conducting. They're letting everybody know where the drop is, and maybe kind of singing along with their own lyric and knowing where the lasers are going to shoot and the pyrotechnics are going to fire.
Yeah.
So kind of encouraging people to go a little deeper and to, push more buttons and kind of be more involved. But there's still all this stuff is art forms that are being written. So head of curves and everything. I will say too that the students generally have had backgrounds with other instruments, and they've arrived at electronics because, kind of maybe similar to myself, there's something they know they need a sound that doesn't quite fit into the 12 tones. They need rhythms that don't fall easy under fingers. They want to exceed the kind of capacity that we're kind of given generally with the fastest of, kind of classic tempos or the slowest of R&B or whatever. It's fun to see people pushing at their limits and needing or reaching for machine alternatives sometimes to help aid that. So they can have an extra hand, or so to speak, an extra hand, or make up for sounds that aren't quite there.
Right. That's cool. I like that. Make up for sounds that aren't quite there. It's lovely. And like, I'm curious, like, I imagine the students who are coming in who have like more of an EDM context of, witnessing conductors, as you said about that as well. I mean, I imagine it's like, a bit mind blowing to like, truly understand like the depths, and the nuance of like what's available to them.
We only have them for a couple semesters though, so we barely scratched the surface, to be honest.
Imagine. Yeah.
It's fun to, it's like generally speaking, I have about 4 semesters with students. And at that time, you can kind of really see them open up, and especially trying to like fit into their sound worlds, into these kind of sometimes awkward instruments. Let's be honest, the computer keyboard and screen, the laptop modality is not made for performance. It's not made barely enough for even interacting on a computer level, much less an instrument level. So when you start to add buttons and knobs and faders, it's exciting, but it's still reductivist. And it's still asking, sometimes you have to have a whole hand to turn a single knob is like, it's not the thing yet. So we're getting there. We're doing things. People are still inventing the future, basically. That's the exciting thing is you kind of see people start to grapple with what they need for their big aspirations. Especially Berklee has tons of really gifted students that are activated, and then they arrive and they're like, okay, this is what's there. Well, what can I do to move that forward? And so some indeed are making their own instruments, making their own plugins, inventing DAW, getting more involved on the programming side.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool where it's building. On a physical level, though, I often invite them to still like not forget the intelligence of their hands or indeed the kind of movement of bodies to kind of help keep them grounded literally and metaphysically. Um, it can get into woo stuff really fast when you teach music. I'll just tell you that now. I mean, stuff that you probably have already felt when you listen to that big song for you, that artist or record or album. I think album and record are the same thing, but still, that um, it's it really touches on things that don't fit in the classroom very easily. So it's cool to kind of work through students sometimes when they're stuck in their awe and their kind of big wonderful eyes towards their big opened ears for that stuff, and you kind of invite that in the classroom too a little bit. I feel sometimes like I'm yeah that it's difficult. That's difficult stuff to teach, but I'm inviting it. I'm doing my best.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's interesting thinking about it as like, inherently reductive because like how do you concentrate all these things, not just, in like a limited amount of time, but in order to, find like a lowest common denominator so that this thing that you're teaching can be accessible to the both those who are coming in with like a more EDM understanding of like what electronic music is and those who are perhaps have already gone beyond that.
And not to slag on pianos, but like they're the most awkward instrument. There's black keys and white keys. They each represent very specific tones. The black keys are strangely enough further away than the white keys. They're a little just that teeny bit harder to play. The hand doesn't necessarily evenly fit. So, and yet that's the main way that people receive most of their music. I mean, give
Yeah.
it to the guitarist, which awkwardly also has more strings than fingers, and there's plenty of reasons why this stuff has persisted, but like it doesn't make sense. And so when we encounter an electronic instrument that can be exactly what you want it to be, it sometimes, in that opposite regard, can also flummox people because they've been able to be for 10 years on some sort of traditional piano-esque thing or guitar or something else that is broad and adopted by education and under education or whatever. But then when they really get the chance to do them, they kind of sometimes try to take their same box and move it to similar size boxes. And
Right.
that whole thing about just, yeah, daring to be outside, daring to be a little bit awkward for a time, and then embrace that awkwardness as their actual superpower is I don't know, is something. There's something to it. I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
Hopefully a lifetime to do that for a period of them. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to embrace that as a superpower. It's like, especially when like sometimes it can come at the expense of belonging, like to build a foundation strong enough to really be like, all right, this is me and that's what's amazing is about it. Is like this is me.
And I'll tell you, I feel like I was able to achieve a bit of that with my weird instrumentation and odd fitting sounds way earlier than some of the other things that I actually should have been dealing with, like my own gender and some of my personage. That
Mm,
took way longer to arrive, or at least to be clarified. And I know it has something to do with growing up when I did. There wasn't necessarily language activated in the same way, and seeing students specifically able to be in their truth, like probably at a much younger age, is very inspiring.
mm,
But I know for myself, where I find myself as non-binary, that's the word that works for me. Uh, it's a kind of boldness that I feel like a lot of people are way more comfortable with, rather than being awkward in their instrument. They're really afraid of that somehow. Like, wait, you've found all this personal truth that's on your body or in your expression,
mm.
but you can't play your guitar, so quote unquote, upside down. Like,
Yeah.
like that's too weird.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to like, who are those permission givers in your life? Like who are the people who are creating precedent and like giving you like a safe space, and the words and the mindset to even know that this is something that you can explore, and like,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. And I love the fact too that even if there isn't someone externally, I think there's this instinct, right? There's this barometer that knows that your truth may not sit easy on others, but it's yours to give as a gift if you so choose.
Mm,
If the person who's in front of you or the personage that's inside of you can be given that, can be allowed to be involved. And it's beautiful when it's done that way. When it's, at odd angles and it's made to feel like imperiled, it sucks. It's tough.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we just gotta, continue to move toward a world where it can be, where those things can always be given as a gift and received as a gift.
Yeah, and usually I would imagine that sound would lead the way. I would imagine that the weird songs that we sing and the things that we do on stage could be the thing that does that. But maybe we're just in a slightly post-show moment. I,
Mhm.
I don't mean that in any kind of serious way. I think shows are still the fundamental, but like I see everyone to the left and right of me at my age, they don't go out anymore. They go out to big arena things, but the idea of going to a night where you didn't know any of the performers on the stage, it's like that's not occurring.
Mhm.
Versus I still know people who are half my age or younger where they'll take a chance if the situation around it, the aura around it is correct. They just need to get out. They need to, and I'm not saying that that's always the case or not, definitely everywhere. I've definitely been places where that's still a vibrancy, but I hate the fact that we lost that around these parts.
Mm.
I actively dislike that people aren't taking chances with the museums that they're attending, the concerts that they're going to, the culture that they surround themselves with. I'm not going to put it on any one force or idea, but that is of all the enemies that we can identify and be against. I think the normative nature of some of the media that we are presented with or consume is one that I think is an easier one to pick on. There's lots of trials and tribulations ongoing, but that's one that maybe we all can agree could do with less of easily. It
Totally.
doesn't seem as it involves as much strife, and yet that same normativeness is used as a weapon in a lot of other spheres of our life, trying to keep
Mhm.
us quiet and kind of in a box. And
Yeah.
so you can see people being kept afraid is such a big part of that. And so maybe it is a slightly easier to assail, but big in its provocation um, to get people shook up a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. Keeping people afraid is just like, we could go
Oh,
down a whole, yeah, it's just, the opposite of what we should be trying to cultivate in the world. And I guess, to a certain extent, to a less extreme degree, like, we're also creatures of comfort, and keeping us within our comfort zones, not checking out things that we're not familiar with, like that becomes easier and easier to
well,
forego and kind of persist within these
I mean,
comfort
especially as
zones.
you accrue so much nostalgia across the course of your life,
Yeah.
you have these big
Mhm.
records for you. Wouldn't it be easier just to listen to that record that does the thing rather than listen to whatever has been pushed or prescribed or available can be lackluster or even worse. And but then of course you're missing out on the chance. You're just missing out on the opportunity.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's actually perfect opportunity to transition into part two of the conversation, in which I dive a little bit more into what you're listening to and how you do it. Um, and yeah, just for context in the background in the show, we are keeping track of all of the music mentions, all the different music entities, and we are maintaining a database that we intend to turn into kind of a neural map, of
Mm.
interactivity that's showing all of these kind of connective threads to the guests and to the music that has made them, to these people and pieces of music that are important enough to mention in conversation like this. So it's not to add any pressure to any of your answers, just just for context.
No, it's great.
Uh, And I'm curious first to, just learn a bit more about how you discover music, today, and if you could kind of frame it through perhaps, who some of your favorite curators are, or some of your favorite outlets, or platforms that you use.
Yeah. I mean, it is as it has been. I am maybe not embracing the now, but almost always hand to hand, ear to ear. They give me their like I ask and they give, which I'm grateful for that exchange. What people are listening to, what they're into. Um, that is number one. That almost always gives me, somebody might give me three, and of that, two will be just incredible, awestruck. And because of the limitations of time and space, I only usually get so much listening in my life, anyways. I have a young child, and so that's even more imperiled. Um, and so I'm greedy for it. I have these little like commutes that I do to school. I have some time between classes, and I'll just put on whatever people have said or done, and either be it through modalities like Bandcamp or Spotify or iTunes, those kind of the top normal three or whatever of some indie and otherwise. And I'll just listen wide. And so often, yeah, there's just sparks will fly. And sometimes my students know my proclivities and they'll know my interests in terms of some of the sounds that I'm ruminating on. And I'll be equally eager to give them back ideas that I'm in feeling.
Mm.
So I feel like that exchange is also very nourishing. Just the back and forth of, hey, I heard you were listening to this, you're working on this, like check out this. And like it, to be honest, I probably am as into nowadays in seeing that eureka, that light bulb go off when I play something that kind of tricks people into like knowing that there is another world of audio out there.
Mm. Yeah.
There are certain artists that I go to, like well water, when people are thirsty, and you can see them just like, what? And a lot of my students are sound designy, they're electronic interested. And so I play them those artists that I know just do that thing and defy convention, don't necessarily play even time, definitely are outside of timbre or outside of kind of, tonality in our traditional 12-tone sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it all, fireworks. And so, yeah, just watching the sparkle in somebody's eyes towards that is yeah, it's beautiful. So there's that thing. So the hand-to-hand thing, but then equally, or I should say increasingly, I keep an ear out for what the algorithm is picking up on,
Mm.
because there are some genres that get hyped, things like drift funk or Bruxaria, these genres that seem to do really well for algorithmic play, be it because they're loud, because it's fast, because they have really like idiosyncratic features to them that make it good for this kind of weird popular consumption, but don't fit into our modern conception of pop music.
Mm.
And yet it's pushed, and yet it's like seized upon. Like,
Mm.
I am so curious why we get like Brazilian baile funk. That's what Bruxaria is. It's this new kind of baile funk, or it's regional baile funk, or whatever you want to call it. But like, why is that the sound of TikTok? Like, why is that the soundtrack? Like, who or how or why? And why is it so vibrant? Why is it so, when you see someone like Ramon Sucesso, where he has this like popular Instagram where he just plays the music with a little addling, with a little bit of DJing, a little bit of like effects. But when the bass hits, the camera shakes, and you just get that immediate uh, synesthetic response of like, oh, it's happening.
Yeah.
Like, I am here for it. And you're through your phone speaker, it's tiny, but the
Mm-hmm.
feeling's immense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's like, I'm not immune to that. I'm not negating that. And I love then shazamming that, or, sound hounding it and figuring out what they're listening to. And occasionally the actual total song is actually quite boring, but the moment plucked is great. And
Mm.
that equally sets off those old sample instincts. I love looking for that 10 seconds of good amongst maybe lots of not great.
Right.
you
Right.
know the Italo funk record, the Italo disco record that has like too many sax solos and
Mm.
terrible Americanized vocals, but gosh, that one little breakdown where the synth and drums just do that perfect thing, that's worth the price of entry.
Totally.
And so sometimes the algorithm is good at that thing, I feel like.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that. It's an interesting to think of this. You almost need like a non-human element that is tracking behavior outside of cultural norms in order to get a peek into something like this, or even for for a phenomenon like this to even happen in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, something that's listening to the overall world, the zeitgeist of a larger sound set than you would ever get privy to. I feel
Right.
like is part of that.
Yeah.
Because equally, some of the like South African house that this would be 5 or 6 years ago was getting hyped up by the machine, and also very worthy because Black Coffee and others were bringing forward that sound, and it really was a breath of fresh air against the backdrop. Or Jikwam, even more so, like more South African sounds, but this time from Durham, right, Durban, um, and elsewhere, made forth another take on what is 4/4,
Hmm.
and suddenly you just have a different sound set, different aesthetic. It's always palpable when you can kind of see existing gears get just pushed around slightly into new international directions. And
Totally.
I obviously soft power is such an existing thing where people are vying, like K-pop is vying to become the worldwide phenomena that it already is. But in some ways, it's like that's what we're listening to, but that's all we're going to be listening to in a couple of years, at least on the pop side of
Yeah.
things. That amount of machinery in the background in order to make something in front of you is going to be really specified. And so when something breaks through that kind of amount, that wall of noise that K-pop or other these big industries presume, Beyonce, a world into her own in terms of industry or that kind of
Hmm.
thing. Not to give it too much air because it's not really needful, but like I just love when you have these like regional sounds that can still be felt against that amount of yeah difficulty.
Totally. Yeah, the slight reframing, and just like even if it's a slightly different cultural context, it can really change everything.
But it becomes essential. It becomes renewed, and it's the ladles put back into the punch, and we get something different tasting. It's great.
I love that. Um, okay, cool. What, if you can remember, is the first album you ever purchased, and then the most recent?
Okay, so the first one I ever purchased was Fine Young Cannibals. I'm trying to remember the name of the record, but I think it was their big record. It was
Uh-huh.
definitely like it was not only the first record I purchased, but it was like the first CD I remember in my. I mean, I'm sure there was other CDs, but this was like the CD player was a new thing to me, to my world, and I bought the CD of this. And so, even though, again, adrift in my parents' record collection, but this was the thing I chose. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that song, She Drives Me Crazy or whatever. And I
Exactly.
mean, I had an older sibling, and that's such a gift in itself. And my older sibling was into some of that synth wave stuff and some of the romantic music of the 80s, so to speak, romantic,
Mm-hmm.
being the new romantic stuff. And so English Beat was somewhere in there. I mean, obviously in movie soundtracks, English Beat was the precursor to Finding Cannibals. And gosh, I just remember, yeah, like diving into the little booklet that came with it, and just like the whole thing had this, like, I didn't make it my life by any means. I didn't dress the part. I didn't participate, but for a very, very young me, it was very, very big in my brain.
Hmm.
And of course, then actually able to play the music that you heard only every once an hour or every 2 hours on the radio, if at
Right.
best. Yeah, it was on repeat as a as
Yeah.
a, as a constant. Yeah, I played the wheels off that record, or the light off whatever. I don't even know how to make that metaphor. And then the most recent, I'm just gonna go to my I'm gonna get slightly dinged for this because it's a slightly older record, but I wanted to finally get it. Fatboy Sharif and Roper Williams with Planet Unfaithful was that was the most recent EP I bought. I don't know if I got it off Bandcamp or if I got it off of iTunes. But Fatboy Sharif is a favorite new MC of mine, new-ish, in the tradition of a little bit more of the beats side of things rather than like the mumble mouth or SoundCloud rap or something else.
Mm-hmm.
But such a personage, such an incredible performer, and grateful that I've now met in New York just recently. And I
Cool.
was like kicking myself, like, why don't I have more of his stuff? Like I'm liking the material, I'm liking, and he just put out a new one that I haven't gotten yet.
Hmm.
But like such an essential voice that I feel like is just coming up. And he hit me up to get a beat. I can say, I think, because nothing's confirmed, but I specifically was like, I put something online recently of like these two AI music makers just kind of talking to each other, having a quote unquote hallucination of sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the things, he was like, I want that one. I'm like, what are you talking about, Fat Boy Sharif? Like, you want these, like, just basically it's the grinding of computer gears against each other. And he's
Hmm.
like, yep, that's the thing. I'm like, and that, I am afraid of what he's going to do. And I love that. I just have no idea. And it's just like, there's no beat. There's just no beat. Like, are you gonna like what's gonna happen here? It's great.
Cool.
So those are the two bookends. But gosh, like
I'm sure there's 3 or 4 in the middle. All right, continuing more recently, I guess who are 3 artists of note that you have heard for the first time in the past year or so? They don't have to be new artists, but just people that you have heard, for the first time.
Mm-hmm. The past year
Ish.
Yeah, I appreciate that. um I mean, I have some things that are slightly embarrassing in the best kind of ways, hopefully.
Right.
But again, like I'm fed things from students, so sometimes the way sound adds up and the way that you kind of start to feel something by proxy is important. I don't think it should be lost. Being in someone else's enthusiasm sphere and their Venn diagram of their things that make them up can sometimes give you, I don't know, just like I get things that I think even a few months ago I wouldn't have enjoyed, I wouldn't have liked, I wouldn't have been on that wave, but gosh, like it hits you. So one of them I would point out immediately is Cash Cobain.
Cool.
And Cash Cobain, I could spell it, but I'm sure you could look it up.
Yeah.
It's just Cobain is spelled as it might sound, Cobain. And it's
Kurt.
yeah, exactly. So it's FYI, but Cash Cobain, and it's one of those things where it's new, modern, from the ground rap, probably made in somebody's bedroom, and sampling things that you shouldn't sample, probably, both from a legal standpoint and also from like an aesthetic, like probably should be off limits, but somebody who's young and not knowing, they break rules and they make new culture and it feels renewed again. So thank goodness for that.
Right. Yeah.
As a constant. I really, so one of the other ones is Tank Jr.
Okay.
I've had like it's probably right at that year limit, right where it's come along, but like, just if I may, just like fucked up, too fast, too loud, too messy. I have a penchant for speed, for some like faster tempos, but like way above and beyond, way pushier than one would expect. There's one song in particular that's like 200 BPM flip of what must have been like some sort of minor TikTok sensation. God Send Me Here to Rock You, I think is what it's called, or like Heaven Sent Me to Rock You or something. Like cheesy pop that they put at 200 BPM and add the craziest, most hellacious kicks behind. And it really feels like a religious epiphany.
Wow.
Why am I feeling this so much? Why is tears flowing out of my eyes on the dance floor for this like terrible, wonderful sound? So that's another thing that's easy to point out as being like a thing. And I mean, if there is a whole wave of artists coming from Jersey specifically who are also pushing the boundaries of what is Jersey club and that scene. Most of their titles begin with produced by or prod by, Prodby, as one word, and then a different name. So there's like produced by Cats, and Cats is spelled, or Kdaz, Kaydaz, or produced by Squeeze, prod by Sweez. That's some newer names in that same tradition, right? There's this like, that's the nomenclature that is used. And very often the sound again is kind of pushed and pulled. It's kind of, maybe it's made entirely for the iPhone. It's made to shoot out of your speaker and like occupy space, not be quiet. They're sampling things like Coldplay and yeah, I guess I'm kind of into people who are sampling things you're not supposed to sample. I guess that's like a theme right now. That isn't it, of course. There's so many other artists, but these people are just bright in my mind immediately because of how I had to find it. Like I would hear it randomly in the background of somebody's video, or somebody would give it to me, and then I would go to look it up on Spotify, and it's like, oh, it's not there. Why isn't it here? Like, why isn't it participating in the dialogue and the discourse? And you just dig, and you get to their SoundCloud, and there's like 10 followers, but there's like 20,000 plays on one of their songs. Like, what's going on? Like, is this how is virality meeting production savvy meeting the kind of like, fuck it, I don't need to participate in the industry that doesn't care about me, isn't listening to me, until the industry inevitably wants to eat of your corpse, right? Eat of your carcass, like, you know, like every bottom feeder thing.
Right.
Yeah, and I like the conventional stuff too. Don't get me wrong. I like DJ Slink from the Jersey scene, like an absolute legend of the Jersey club kind of movement, and you know, other more, you know, typical fast artists, and the new Square Pusher is great, and like there's plenty of things to laud and like, but I mean, as always, the things on the fringe have such vitality. Gosh,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah, and you know, and the ones that you discover kind of unexpectedly through unexpected sources and you know, in unexpected ways, like that, that really does become, you know, part of your relationship with the music. Like it really does has a, you know, have a big impact.
And two, I should mention, I don't love all the songs of these artists. Cash Cobain, like, really can say some things that I dislike. I don't want to be a party to. Just to put it in the box, equally, Tank Jr. is fine. Some of the songs hit, some of the songs miss. That one song is glorious. Other things just kind of like, and I like the fact that there are winners and losers for me, and that they can have their own aesthetic, and I can dip in, dip out. There's other artists where I really like their totality. I've really been
Right.
on their wave, and but I think I'm too close to it. It's like I'm kind of now involved in that, and I will just like everything they do, and I'm going to consume it as an avid fan, as a follower. But it does become a little bit like I've become boxed in by it. So
Mm,
I am looking for things that exceed my vessel often.
yeah, exceeding our vessel. We should always seek.
Mhm.
uh, cool. Um, okay, here's the big question. You're going to a desert island, and you get to bring 3 records with you. What are they?
Yeah. Okay. Mm, we don't get like compilations. We don't get like whole artists, right?
I don't think you can take like, you know, a whole discography, but people have been known to push, you know,
Hmm.
restrictions of this question. So you can be creative with the answer.
Appreciate that. I make all kinds of excuses. I think I should stay on target. I'm gonna bring Flying Lotus's Los Angeles. That's an easy one.
Cool.
Fly Low is a friend, and that record in particular was such a big moment in my life, and I believe our scene, but also of course a breakout record for Fly Low.
Hmm.
That one's easy and maybe a little distant from the body. One that's closer to my body that I would also mention, even though it's maybe a little too similar in terms of years and idea, but it's a must, is Mad Villainy by Mad Villain, which is of course MF Doom and Madlib.
Hmm.
My participation in that record changed my life. I think it'd be nice to be able to, on Desert Island, both listen with this kind of awe and sense of reverence towards the music, but then also that little sense of pride that I did that one thing once,
Right.
and that it changed my life certainly, and maybe a few others.
Yes,
And
it certainly did, I think.
it's nice. It's just there's something about being a musician. Sometimes we can in tone, we can kind of, it's the whole spitting in the wind kind of metaphor can happen a lot. You just kind of yelling at the sky, and
Mm,
like pretty much a void. And just, you know, be it songs that get a little bit more of a look or listen, or kind of videos that happen and stuff, it's nice, but all too often it really still feels like, you know, it's, you can kind of remember the time you were making up the song, or you can remember when you were trying to program it or get it right. And it's nice to have that thing of somebody else decided that it had specialness, somebody else figured it out. I never figured out my original song experience. The song that they sampled is like a nothing song. It's 2 minutes of like experiments and like pastoral electronica at best. Electronica would even be a stretch. Just,
mm,
yeah, just weird sound collage vibes. It just
yeah.
happened to not be made of samples, and Madlib figured it out,
Mm.
perfected it, and made it this kind of weaponized form of pastoral nothingness, and like made it all nostalgic and all the. Anyways, I would love that record would be, that's easy. Mm. The third one's kind of flummoxing, right? Like, do you go in the Wayback Machine and get something that, and also like, what mood do you need? I mean, how deserted is this island? There's nobody else. It's just me,
It's,
my
yeah,
partner.
presumably just you. No guarantee that you'll ever have access to their music.
Mm.
Very sad, of course, but like, you know, I guess it has to be part of the calculus. Yeah.
Um, I mean, part of me wants to take my ASIN, right? Wants to take my all times with me, but I have that already. I contain that. Like I don't need to listen to it again to know it. I know the contour of that place too well. Um, I'm gonna go a little further back. I'm gonna get Alice Regina
Nice.
and Jobim, Tom Jobim. The Ellis and Tom record would be an easy one.
Cool. It's a great record.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I don't know the language enough to know what they're saying in particular. I don't know Portuguese. I don't know the saudade involved. Are you familiar with this term, right? It's like that the happy, sad, the longing. I you hear it, it's abundant,
Yeah.
but like the measures by which it's prescribed is like unknown. But like the way it reaches through the album and gives you everything you need is abundant. I could easily pick a number of other Brazilian artists from the same period, be it Tropicalia or the moments leading up to that, indeed, like this record is. But that one's a good one. That's solid. That could last probably the next, couple years before the coconuts run out and I just pass.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like listening to Brazilian music when you're on a deserted island. My wife she's from Brazil, so I am, yeah.
Wait, is she a Paulista or is she a Carioca? Is she somewhere else?
No, she's from Belém, like the north of the country, just like on the edge of the Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah. They have some strong candomblé there. They do things. I mean, I don't know about your wife, but some of that stuff is slower and it's amazing. All the samba is just that little slower. It's amazing. So,
Indeed, I agree.
yeah.
Um, and that's it. You made it
Okay.
to the gauntlet. And yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time, Alfred. Really, really enjoyed our conversation. Uh, actually, last question for you.
Sure, sure.
Now that you have been through this, who's another music head that comes to mind who we should have on the show?
Julia Halter. I think you would do no better than Julia. Nels Klein would also be, I'm sure, a gift given. I like his brain when he talks about sound. He's a good player, but gosh, that brain. Julia would be amazing. So some people closer to me that I know, but like Terrace Martin would be amazing. He's a little difficult to pin down. Terrace is somebody who was in my jazz high school band.
Oh,
He
cool.
was my little group we had. So you can see some of the reason why I was inspired by jazz is I was around great players. Terrace was one, and he hadn't quite found his identity and voice yet, but it was already clear that he was going to do great things, and he did. He is.
Yeah.
So Terrace would be amazing. But busy. From the LA scene, from the more beat scene, Teebs from Tengray would be awesome. And he's a visual person, but he also occupies a space that is informed by deep conundrums, beautiful things. So Teebs would be, I think, a great get.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, a million more.
I know there are millions, and hopefully, we get there.
It's a great series you already have established. I'm really honored to be part. So thank you so much. And, I look
Yeah,
forward to hearing
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. It was my pleasure. Really enjoyed our conversation. For folks listening who want to get involved with your work, your music, what's the best place for them to for them to follow along?
Yeah, just enroll in Berklee College of Music and attend as an EDI, and we can have a lot of personal sessions talking about big and small things and buttons, a lot of buttons.
Lots of
But
buttons.
barring that, if that's a little bit not in your plans, I have music on Bandcamp and on Spotify. I try to be where ears are, and I think the music has it. It tattles on me all the time. So even things that I'm not admitting to, it's in the music. It's in the music.
Mm, I love
So you want to know me better than I know me, just go listen to a few records, and I'm sure you would.
I love that. Cool. Well, awesome. It was great having you here, Alfred. Thank you again so much.
Thank you so much, Keegan. I'll talk to you hopefully in the future, somewhere at a tech conference concerning heady subjects, and who knows.
Totally. I'm here for it.
Awesome. All right. Bye.
All right, cool. Take care. Thanks, everyone, for being here. That's a wrap on another episode of For the Record, a conversation series with all manner of music heads about their stories and the music that makes them. It's a production of Grey Matter, and a new Crate Coalition experiment in building connective listening graphs. We stamp every music mention you heard here, from musicians to venue owners, to journalists, to tech builders, to DJs. And in the background, we're mapping these names to form those yet unseen connective threads between people. Want to get involved? You can check out our website at graymatter.fm or come hang out in the Crate Coalition Discord. See you next time.